Rain gathered like a silver veil over Victoria Island, turning traffic lights into tiny stained glass windows. Inside the compact pharmacy on Aquina de Sola, Isabella Idu counted blister packs and watched the seconds tick down on a life that never gave her enough time or cash. The bell above the door chimed, a mother rushed in for cough syrup, a banker in a navy suit asked for vitamins. Life continued its restless shuffle. But Isabella's mind was not in the pharmacy. It was in a classroom she could picture but couldn't yet afford. Grace's future school, with wide windows, gleaming lab benches, and a teacher who had time for every question. She had promised their mother she would get Grace there. Promises are heavier than granite when the rent is due. At closing, she stepped into the drizzle and pulled her scarf tight. A black sedan slid to a stop beside the curb, its engine a low purr. The passenger window lowered to reveal a woman with calm eyes and the kind of confidence money can buy. "Miss Idu?" the woman asked. "Yes. I'm Adaora. We spoke by phone." Her voice was soft, professional. "If you're still interested, I can take you to the clinic now. The screening must happen today." The word screening made Isabella's stomach flutter. She had read the brochure 5 times and still couldn't believe such a life existed. A discreet surrogacy program, world-class doctors, ironclad contracts, one client, one condition. The surrogate must be a virgin. She slid into the back seat, palms moist, and watched Lagos stream by. Billboards, rain, a roadside suya stand smoking into the night. The city looked like a heartbeat on fast forward. The clinic glowed white and gold, its lobby full of whispering air conditioners and orchids blooming in thick glass. A receptionist took Isabella's name and handed her a clipboard whose questions were more intimate than any she had answered. Cycles, surgeries, infections, family history. She filled every line with slow, careful handwriting. When she looked up, a woman in a navy blazer was already waiting. "I'm Dr. Melinda Adiemi," she said, extending her hand. "I'll be your lead physician if you proceed." Dr. Melinda had the kind of voice that steadies fear without pretending it isn't real. She walked Isabella through the steps, blood panels, STI screens, a pelvic exam, an ultrasound, genetic testing, psychological evaluation. "You're applying as a gestational carrier," the doctor explained. "You will carry a child who is not genetically yours. You will have medical autonomy, counseling support, and legal protection. If any part of this feels wrong, you may stop at any time." "Who is the client?" Isabella asked, surprised at how even her voice sounded. "You'll meet him after your initial clearance," Dr. Melinda said. "But you should know, he is well known. Privacy is non-negotiable." Ours became a sequence of rooms. Phlebotomy, sonography, counseling. Isabella lay still while an ultrasound wand traced winter blue images across a screen, the hum of the machine like distant rain. She held her breath during the psychological screening and answered every question with stubborn honesty. She was doing this for Grace. She was not reckless. She was not weak. She was not confused. By the time she stepped into the consultation suite, her nerves had smoothed into a taut, almost graceful determination. A folder sat on the table. Beside it, a glass of water. Across from her, a man rose from a leather chair. He was taller than television made billionaires look, broad-shouldered in an ash-gray suit, tie loosened as if he resented it. His face was all angles and restraint, his eyes the storm color of Bar Beach before a squall. He didn't smile. "Miss Idu," he said, the baritone low and measured, "I'm Waylen Danjuma." The name hung in the air. Even if she had never read a business column, Lagos itself would have taught her the syllables. Danjuma, who turned failing factories into humming engines. Danjuma, who bought companies the way other men bought shoes. Danjuma, who never gambled with the 2 currencies he respected, time and truth. He gestured to the chair. "Please." Isabella sat, feeling the weight of his attention like a hand pressing lightly between her shoulder blades. "I asked the agency to find someone with your profile," he said, opening the folder. "Healthy, clear family history, quiet life, no public entanglements, and," his gaze did not flinch, "never been with a man." The room seemed to concentrate. Isabella placed her palms flat on her skirt to ground herself. "Why is that important to you?" He didn't blink. Because I live under a microscope. I will not have headlines debating paternity or scandal. I also prefer directness. His tone didn't harden. It clarified. I intend to have a child. I don't intend to marry. I won't pretend otherwise to soothe anyone's conscience, including mine. He slid a document toward her. The contract was as precise as a scalpel. Compensation in milestones. Premium health coverage. A private wing in his Banana Island home for security and monitoring. A driver. A nutritionist. An in-house midwife and counseling. Medical autonomy was underlined twice. So were boundaries. No press, no visitors without clearance, no public appearances after the second trimester. An entire section detailed her right to refuse any procedure she didn't want. There's one more term, Waylen said. No clinical transfer. She looked up. You mean, no IVF? Correct. Conception will be natural. The words were bare but not coarse. You can refuse. If you do, the process ends here. If you agree, you'll have full consent at every step. There is no us without that. Silence filled with rain ticking against the window. Isabella's heart thudded like a prayer drum. It was the bluntness that startled her, not the meaning. For weeks she had pictured sterile rooms and petri dishes. She had not pictured a man who said exactly what he wanted without hiding behind protocol. Why me? She asked finally. His answer was not flattering and not unkind. Because you are disciplined. Because you said in counseling you do not confuse pity with love. Because you asked for everything in writing. He closed the folder. Because you are doing this for someone other than yourself. Grace's name rose to the edge of Isabella's mouth and settled back down, tender and heavy. My sister, she said. I promised her. Something in his expression shifted by a single degree, like a tight door easing on its hinges. Then we are both making good on something. Dr. Melinda returned with a notary and the agency lawyer. Pages turned. Questions were asked and answered. Isabella initialed clauses that protected her body and future. Waylen signed sections that obligated his money in silence. When it was done, everyone left them with the last page. Miss Idu, Isabella, he corrected himself, voice softer by a shade. I want you to stay at the house from tomorrow. Security will be simpler. You will have your space. No one will bother you. Will you? The question surprised her, an unguarded slip. His mouth almost curved. Only with your permission. On the drive home, the rain had stopped. Streetlights stitched gold up and down the wet road. Isabella pressed the folder to her chest and imagined Grace in a crisp uniform. A lab coat too big at first. The sleeves rolled twice. Fear and relief braided inside her. At the flat, Grace was asleep amid textbooks, a pencil tucked behind her ear. Isabella kissed her forehead and whispered, We're going to be okay. She lay awake long after midnight, staring at the wavering shadow of the louver blades on the ceiling. The terms were clear. The tests were clean. Tomorrow she would step into a life scaled in marble and quiet rules. She had chosen this. She would keep choosing it, hour by hour, for the girl who dreamed with a stubbornness that looked like faith. Outside, Lagos exhaled. Somewhere across the island, a man who didn't believe in love was clearing a wing of his mansion for the woman who had just promised to carry his child. And the city, forever loud, forever moving, held its breath for what came next. The Danjuma mansion rose from the heart of Banana Island like it had been carved from glass and stone, each floor spilling light into the Lagos evening. A pair of black gates slid open without a sound as the chauffeur drove Isabella through. She clutched her small overnight bag, fingers tight around the handle, her heart beat loud against the car's quiet hum. Inside, the air was cool, scented faintly of lilies. The house was silent in that way wealth can buy. Thick walls, cushioned footsteps. The city held firmly outside. A uniformed steward met her at the door and guided her through marble halls, past floor-to-ceiling windows, to a guest wing with its own sitting room, bedroom, and ensuite bath. You'll be comfortable here, the steward said, setting her bag down. Mr. Danjuma will see you shortly. Isabella nodded, trying to absorb the sheer scale of it. This was another world. Polished floors reflecting the gold of recessed lighting. Art pieces she'd only ever seen in magazines. Silence broken only by the occasional whisper of central air. She smoothed her dress and sat on the edge of the bed, palms damp. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. "Come in," she said, rising. Waylen stepped inside, not in his usual suit, but in a crisp white shirt and black trousers, sleeves rolled once at the forearm. He studied her for a moment, as though confirming she was truly there. "Settling in?" he asked. "It's beautiful," she managed. He inclined his head slightly. "You remember the terms?" She nodded. The arrangement had been discussed, signed, and notarized. Tonight was not a surprise. It was the step they had agreed upon. Still, standing before him, the weight of it felt real in a way it hadn't in an office under fluorescent lights. "I meant what I said," Waylen continued, his voice even. "You can walk away now if you've changed your mind." She met his eyes, finding no mockery there, only a steady patience. "I haven't changed my mind." His shoulders eased by a fraction. "Then we begin." The evening unfolded without hurry. They shared a quiet dinner in a smaller dining room away from the grandeur of the main hall. Grilled fish, jollof rice, and fresh mango juice. Waylen asked about Grace, about Isabella's work at the pharmacy. She found herself answering more than she expected, drawn out by the rare softness in his tone. Later, he led her back to her suite. The night pressed warm against the windows. Somewhere in the gardens, cicadas hummed. Waylen paused by the doorway, searching her face. "Are you certain?" he asked again. "Yes," she said, the words steady. What followed was not rushed. His movements were deliberate, his voice low, guiding rather than demanding. The air between them shifted, less about the transaction they had agreed to, more about the connection forming in real time. It was unfamiliar territory for Isabella, but not frightening. She had chosen this. She was in control of her yes, and she gave it. When it was over, the quiet returned, threaded with something new. Waylen didn't linger long, only made sure she was comfortable before leaving with a nod. "Rest," he said simply. The next morning, sunlight spilled through sheer curtains. Isabella rose early, showered, and joined him for breakfast on the terrace. Conversation was lighter, about the weather, the view, the book she had brought from home. By the end of the week, they met again, just as they had agreed, the unspoken understanding between them stronger this time. Days later, a white envelope appeared on the breakfast table, placed there by Dr. Melinda herself. Waylen gestured for Isabella to open it. Her hands shook as she slid out the folded sheet. Pregnancy confirmed. She exhaled, a sound that was half laugh, half relief. Grace's future seemed to sharpen into focus. School fees, uniforms, the certainty of a life without the constant fear of lack. Waylen's gaze lingered on her, unreadable, but there was a shift in it, something like acknowledgement. "You'll stay here now," he said. "Security will be simpler, and I'll know you're cared for properly." It wasn't a request, but it wasn't unkind either. Isabella returned to her suite that evening to find the room transformed. Fresh flowers on the nightstand, a bookshelf stocked with novels she'd mentioned in passing, a framed photograph of Lagos Lagoon at dusk. It was all too considered to be accidental. In the quiet, she pressed a hand to her stomach, the enormity of it settling over her. This house, this man, this child, it was all real now. And though the contract had been clear, the lines between agreement and emotion already felt less defined. Somewhere in the house, she could hear Waylen speaking into his phone, his voice firm, commanding. She imagined him in his study, issuing orders that moved millions of naira and decided the fate of companies. Yet here, in this wing, life was beginning in the smallest, most human way possible. And for the first time since she signed the contract, Isabella wondered if this arrangement would ever stay as simple as it looked on paper. The days in the mansion began to form their own rhythm. Morning check-ins with Dr. Melinda, a carefully planned diet by the in-house chef, light walks in the shaded garden paths, afternoons resting in the guest wing's sunlit sitting room. Waylen was rarely home for long stretches, his schedule carved into meetings, calls, and the kind of business negotiations that seemed to exist in their own orbit. Yet somehow he was present in small, deliberate ways. A driver ready before she even asked. A quiet knock at her door before dinner. A single sentence. "Are you comfortable?" That sounded more genuine than it should have from a man who lived behind walls. It was during one of those quiet dinners, seated across from each other in the smaller dining room, that he asked, "You speak so precisely. Where did you study?" "University of Lagos," she said, her tone humble. "Chemical engineering." He paused mid-cut, knife hovering over grilled tilapia. "Engineering?" She nodded. "But after graduation, nothing. I applied for positions for a year. The only steady job I found was at a pharmacy in Victoria Island. It wasn't what I trained for, but it paid enough to keep my sister in school." Something shifted in his gaze, curiosity sliding into a kind of respect he didn't voice. He began to notice more, the way she addressed the house staff by name, thanking them for even the smallest task, the patience in her voice when she called Grace in the evenings, listening to every detail of her younger sister's school day, the way she would pause mid-walk in the garden to greet security guards, making them laugh in a way Waylen had never seen them do. He had chosen her for specific reasons: privacy, discipline, health. But now he was seeing layers he hadn't accounted for. And then there was the memory. He wasn't a man who romanticized intimacy. For him, it had always been a transaction, a mutual arrangement without sentiment. But what happened between them in those 2 nights had unsettled something in him. Her warmth, her trust, the way she met his gaze without flinching. It wasn't only that she had given herself willingly, it was that she had made him feel in a way he couldn't easily name. That was not part of the terms. One evening, he found himself in the kitchen, a rare place for him, watching her laugh with the chef over a bowl of egusi soup she was helping to stir. The sound slipped into him uninvited. He stood there longer than he should have, unnoticed, realizing he didn't just want her to carry his child, he wanted her. But wanting her meant crossing a line neither of them had drawn in the contract. Later in his study, he stared at the signed agreement in his desk drawer. It was precise, binding, cold. She would carry his child. She would be compensated. When the time came, she would leave. That was the plan. Only now the plan felt inadequate. That night, as she passed him in the hallway, he stopped her. "Isabella." She turned, her dress brushing against the light as she faced him. "Yes?" His eyes searched hers, weighing words against impulse. "I want you to stay here, not just because of the baby. I enjoy your presence." She blinked, surprised. "That's kind, but I know it's not in the agreement," he cut in. "I know I didn't offer more, but I'm telling you now, I want more. I want you to be with me, not just until the child is born. After." She hesitated, her fingers curling against her side. "Waylen, this wasn't supposed to be." "I decide what it's supposed to be," he said, softer now but no less certain. "And I've decided I want you here, with me, as my woman. I'll protect you. I'll protect your sister, and I'll protect this child. You don't have to answer tonight. But know this, I'm not a man who changes his mind easily." She walked away that night without giving him an answer, her mind crowded with questions she hadn't prepared for. The arrangement had been clear. Now the lines were blurring, and she wasn't sure whether to be afraid of them or curious about where they might lead. The rainy season swept into Lagos with a quiet insistence, softening the edges of the city. In the Danjuma mansion, the air smelled faintly of sandalwood and warm bread from the kitchen. Isabella had been living there for over 2 months, and though her initial unease had faded, the weight of Waylen's recent words still lingered. He wanted her, not just the child, her. She told herself it was too soon to decide anything, but her heart kept remembering moments she couldn't unsee. The way his voice lowered when asking about Grace's schooling, the quiet patience when he walked beside her in the garden, the protective way he watched her in public spaces. One morning, she was on a video call with Grace, laughing about a class project, when a headline alert flashed on her phone. Anonymous source claims Danjuma's surrogate is former street vendor. The tone was cruel, the speculation worse. She closed the screen quickly, not wanting Grace to see. By lunchtime, Waylen had already read the piece. She found him in his study, jaw set, phone pressed to his ear. "I don't care what it costs," he said, his voice sharp as glass. "Pull it down and find out who sold it." He hung up and looked at her, his expression easing only slightly. "You saw it?" She nodded. "It's fine. I'm used to people assuming things." "It's not fine." He leaned back in his chair, his gaze steady. "No one talks about you that way. Not while you're under my roof." The words should have sounded possessive. Instead, they felt safe. Over the next weeks, his protectiveness became impossible to ignore. He accompanied her to every prenatal appointment, sitting through long waits without a single complaint. When she mentioned craving roasted plantain at midnight, it appeared in her suite 15 minutes later, still warm. And it wasn't just for her. Grace began receiving care packages, new school books, a tablet for research, even a set of lab coats. "For when she gets to the real experiments," Waylen said casually, as if it were nothing. Isabella knew it wasn't nothing. One evening, a sudden power outage plunged the mansion into darkness. The hum of the generator didn't come immediately, leaving the house in an almost eerie quiet. Isabella, in her sitting room, fumbled for the small flashlight on her nightstand. A knock sounded at her door. "It's me!" Waylen's voice called. She opened it to find him holding 2 candles, their flames flickering gold against his shirt. "You're all right?" he asked. "Yes." She smiled faintly. "I'm not afraid of the dark." "Good," he said, stepping inside. He set the candles on the coffee table, their light softening the room. "Still, I thought we could wait it out together." They talked for nearly an hour, about his travels, her time at university, even small, ordinary things like favorite meals and least favorite movies. She found herself laughing, really laughing, at one of his stories about a failed cooking attempt in his 20s. In that warm, dim light, something shifted between them. The walls around him, so high, so deliberate, didn't seem as impenetrable. His gaze lingered longer, his smile coming more easily. When the generator finally rumbled to life and the lights returned, neither of them moved right away. He stood first. "I meant what I said before," he told her quietly. "I want you here, not just until the baby's born." Her pulse jumped. "Waylen, I'm not asking for an answer tonight." He reached for the door handle, then paused. "But I will keep asking, and I will keep proving I mean it." In the days that followed, he did exactly that. She noticed the little things first, her favorite hibiscus tea stocked in the kitchen, the bookshelf in her suite now filled with titles she'd mentioned months ago. Then came the bigger gestures, arranging for Grace to spend weekends at the mansion, hiring a private tutor for her sister, ensuring she had the best teachers in Lagos. And with each act, the contract that had once felt like a shield between them now felt like a fragile barrier, one she wasn't sure she wanted to keep intact. The night before her 7th month began, Isabella lay awake, one hand resting over the gentle curve of her belly. She could feel the baby's faint movements, steady and alive. She thought about the man who had started as her employer and had become something more complex, more dangerous to her heart. It was no longer just about carrying his child. It was about carrying the possibility of a life together. A possibility that scared her almost as much as it thrilled her. The morning her labor began, Lagos was wrapped in a pale dawn haze. Isabella had been pacing her suite, restless from a night of strange dreams. When the first sharp pang caught her breath, she called for the midwife, and within minutes, the calm order of the Danjuma mansion dissolved into quiet urgency. Waylen arrived from his early meeting before the driver even cut the engine. He came straight to her side, his usual guarded expression stripped away. "I'm here," he said simply, taking her hand. Hours blurred into a rhythm of breathing, coaching, and the steady presence of the man who never let go of her fingers. And then with a final push, the room was filled with the sound of new life. A small, fierce cry that seemed to pierce through every wall Waylen had ever built. Dr. Melinda placed the baby in Isabella's arms, her eyes filling as she looked down at the tiny face. Waylen stood close, one hand on Isabella's shoulder, the other brushing lightly over the child's cheek. "She's perfect," he murmured, his voice raw in a way she'd never heard before. For a moment, nothing else existed, just the three of them, bound by something no contract could define. But the outside world was waiting. By the time they returned to the mansion, word had already leaked to certain family members. That evening, in the study, two of Waylen's uncles arrived unannounced. "You know the agreement," one of them said pointedly. "She leaves. The child stays. That's what protects our name." Waylen stood at the window, his back to them, the city lights scattered like stars beyond the glass. "The child stays," he said, turning to face them, "and so does her mother." "This wasn't the arrangement," the other uncle snapped. "I'm aware," Waylen replied, his tone cutting. "The arrangement has changed. She is under my protection now, and in my life. If you have a problem with that, you can leave." The uncles exchanged a look, muttered something under their breath, and departed without another word. When the door closed, Isabella stepped into the room, the baby sleeping in her arms. "They're right about one thing," she said softly. "This wasn't the arrangement." Waylen's gaze softened as it moved from her face to the child. "I know. I also know I don't want a life where you aren't here. I meant what I told you months ago. I want you with me. Not just as the mother of my child. As my woman. My partner." She searched his face, looking for hesitation, but found none. "And if I say yes? What happens to Grace? To my life outside these walls?" He took a step closer. "Grace will have every opportunity she deserves. You'll have the freedom to finish whatever dreams you put on hold. I'll make sure you're never trapped here. You'll stay because you want to." She was quiet for a long moment, the only sound the baby's soft breathing. "Waylen, I never planned for this. I thought I was just borrowing your world for 9 months. And now?" She smiled faintly, tears blurring her vision. "Now I think your world might be one I could call mine." He reached for her free hand, his grip warm, steady. "Then say yes." She did. Not in a grand speech, but in the way she stepped into him, resting her head against his chest, letting him hold both her and their daughter as if they were one. The weeks that followed felt different. Grace moved into a bright room down the hall from Isabella's. The mansion felt less like a fortress and more like a home. Waylen was still the man who commanded boardrooms and closed impossible deals. But in the quiet spaces, feeding the baby at dawn, walking with Isabella in the gardens, he was something else entirely. One evening as the sun dipped low over the lagoon, Waylen stood with Isabella on the balcony outside her suite. He wrapped an arm around her, their daughter asleep in her crib inside. "I spent you anyway," she murmured. "Years thinking love was a distraction," he said quietly. "I was wrong. It's the one thing I should have been looking for all along." She leaned into him, the city lights stretching out before them. "Good thing it found you." Below, Banana Island glowed like a promise. Inside, the child they'd made together slept under the same roof as the family they were building. Unexpected, unplanned, and entirely theirs. A year later, the Danjuma mansion no longer felt like a place Isabella was visiting. It was home. The halls that once echoed with polite footsteps now carried the sound of laughter. Grace teasing her niece in the garden, Waylen reading bedtime stories in his deep, steady voice. The baby, now walking unsteadily on chubby legs, had Waylen wrapped around her tiny fingers. His cold, guarded air had softened. He still ran boardrooms with precision. But at home, he was the man who knelt on the floor to catch his daughter when she tottered into his arms. The man who waited for Isabella in the kitchen at midnight just to share mango slices. Sometimes, Isabella would pause at the edge of the balcony, looking out at the lights of Lagos, remembering the night she first arrived, unsure if she was making a mistake. Now she understood that what began as a contract had become a life, one built on trust, choice, and a love neither of them had expected. And in the quiet, with the warm air wrapping around her, she'd smile, knowing she hadn't just given him a child. She'd given him her heart, and he'd guarded it as fiercely as he once guarded his empire.